Rarely have the spheres of sport, politics and science collided in such spectacular fashion. For 11 days earlier this year, the world's attention was gripped by the titanic row over whether tennis superstar Novak Djokovic would be allowed to stay in Australia to compete in the country's Open tournament. He was eventually kicked out of the country, effectively judged a danger to public health. He hasn't spoken publicly about this until now. I'm Amol Rajan, and I've been invited to the Novak Tennis Centre in Belgrade for an exclusive interview with this sporting giant. And this is an extended version of our conversation. Amol Rajan interviews Novak Djokovic for BBC Sounds. Novak Djokovic, thank you very much indeed for speaking to the BBC and to me. It's good to be here in Belgrade beside the mighty Danube River. You've had an interesting few months, leading news bulletins around the world with your attempt to gain entry to Australia and compete at the Australian Open, but you've kept mostly silent until now. Why have you agreed to this interview?
Well, welcome. Thank you for coming to Belgrade and giving me the opportunity to speak. The reason why I was silent up to now is because I wanted to respect my colleagues, tennis, Australian Open, and obviously prior to that, the legal processes that I was part of. And also I wanted to take some time to reflect on everything that has happened because there was a lot of emotions.
Do you feel that you've been misunderstood or misrepresented in recent weeks?
I feel there was a lot of wrong conclusions. You know, it wasn't easy also following the media and everything that was written about me in the previous 4 or 5 weeks. So I'm happy that I get a chance today to speak to you and to tell you my part of the story.
Did it take a big toll on you mentally?
Of course it did. I mean, the sole reason why I wanted to go to Australia was to take part in Australian Open, the most successful tennis tournament that I ever had in my career. I love Australia. The greatest results that I ever made were there on that court in Melbourne, and I always had a wonderful connection with people there. And results are testament to how I felt. So of course, it was very, very strange feeling. You know, I always respected the rules and followed all the protocols, everything that was required for me in order to get to Australia. So it was sad that I had to leave it the way I did.
It's interesting you mentioned the rules up front. What would you say to the ordinary Australian listening to you now, who has endured immense sacrifices and restrictions on their liberty over the past couple of years, but who looks at you and says, based on what they see in the news, this guy thinks he's above the law. He thinks that he doesn't have to abide by the same rules as everyone else.
Australia has been through one of the most severe lockdowns that we had since the beginning of the pandemic. So I can only imagine how hard it was for Australians, and I empathize with all the people. And I understand that there has been lots of, frustrations from Australian people towards me and towards the entire situation and the way it was dealt with. But I would like to say that I always followed the rules, and I was ready not to go to Australia. I mean, as much as I love the country, and always looked forward to go to Australian summer and participate in Australian Open, it was a very difficult decision for me because I understood that with the decision that I made, there's going to be consequences, and that consequence is me not going to Australia, and I was ready.
So when the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says there should be no special rules for Novak Djokovic, you agree with him?
I agree that there shouldn't be any special rules. I never used my privileged status to get into Australia by force or do anything in this entire process. So I was treated as anybody else. And when there was a possibility for a medical exemption, I was using that, and I applied and I put forward my PCR test, my sufficient amount of antibodies that I had at the time, and I got accepted and approved by 2 independent Australian medical panels anonymously. I think it's important to mention. My name was not on the application, neither did anyone else who applied for medical exemption. I think there was about above 20 or 25 medical exemptions that were reviewed and accepted. And I know certainly there were another two people, one player and one coach, that had an exactly the same medical exemption that I did with a recent COVID infection and non-vaccinated status, and got into the country 10 days before I did. And then their visas were revoked or canceled, and that they had to leave the country, basically the same time I did.
Because this is an important point which a lot of people may not know, which is that your actual medical application, your medical exemption, was anonymous, and it was accepted by two independent Australian panels, and that's separate to the travel declaration, which had a human error, which we may come on to.
Absolutely. It was. The visa declaration error was not deliberately made. It was accepted and confirmed by the federal court and the minister himself and the Ministry for Immigration in Australia. So actually, what people probably don't know is that I was not deported from Australia on the basis that I was not vaccinated or I broke any rules or that I made an error in my visa declaration. All of that was actually confirmed and approved and validated by the Federal Court of Australia and the Ministry for Immigration. The reason why I was deported from Australia was because Minister for Immigration used his discretional right to cancel my visa based on his perception that I might create some anti-vaxx sentiment in the country or in the city, which I completely disagree with.
And that you are potentially a threat to public health.
Yes.
Let's come on to that in a moment. Just before we do that, there is such sound and fury around events in Australia that, as you say, I think it'd be very useful to correct the record and establish some facts as you understand them. You conducted a PCR test here in Serbia on December the 16th, 2 days after attending a basketball match where COVID was circulating. Court documents indicate that the Institute of Public Health of Serbia said the result came back positive 7 hours later, around 8 p.m. But you weren't told of that PCR result on that day, were you? You were told only later the next day.
Yes, that's correct.
You did a rapid antigen or lateral flow test the following morning, December the 17th, before attending an awards presentation with children here in Belgrade. That result on that lateral flow test was negative. So, to be clear, you did not know that you had COVID-19 when, unmasked, you met those children.
That is correct.
You then received your positive PCR result, i.e. indicating that you did have COVID-19, later that day, December the 17th. Did you, or more likely your team, make any efforts to notify the families of those children, or those people present at the award ceremony, that they had been in close company with someone? You did. What sort of efforts did you make?
Yes, we contacted the federation because the award ceremony was organized by Tennis Federation of Belgrade. So we did contact them. We did advise them that, I've received my PCR test and it was positive.
Because as you know, that picture of you, which circulated online with young players, when you had COVID, but you say you weren't aware, it caused huge anger around the world. It seemed like almost a provocation to lots and lots of people. What would you say to those people who argue that it was deeply irresponsible to attend that event before you'd had your PCR test result?
I would say that I understand. I really do. I must say that also I was asymptomatic, so I felt fine. I took the rapid antigen test that morning. As you mentioned, it was negative. I wanted to be there for the children. I wanted to, I know how much it means to them. For me to give them an award, and they worked hard for that. There was about 20 children that won an award earlier that year. So that's all I can say, really. I mean, I saw my PCR positive test only a few hours after that.
But do you wish in retrospect that you hadn't attended that event?
Look, I did not see the PCR test before that. If I have seen it, I wouldn't, of course. But I understand why people are angry, because when they see something like that, it doesn't make them feel comfortable in a retrospect of what happened in Australia. But I don't think I've made a mistake there.
Did you know that you had COVID-19 when the next day, December the 18th, you conducted an interview and a photo shoot with L'Equipe magazine at your tennis center here in Belgrade?
Yes, and that was a poor judgment of error that I wish I can bring back the time and not have done it.
You have apologized
Yes.
for that. You saw that you There was a journalist that I think came over from France with a photographer.
Yes.
You didn't tell the journalist that you had COVID-19, but you used a mask and you socially distanced. What was your thinking? Why did you go ahead with that when you knew you had COVID?
Well, several reasons. First, because I respect L'Equipe as one of the best sports paper in the world. Frank, the journalist, was somebody that I've known for many, many years and always had a great relationship with him. And we already have organized that meeting for quite some time. And it was hard for us to find a day when we could schedule. I didn't want to let him down. Should I have been more cautious? Should I have advised him? Absolutely. I wish I can take it back. It was my mistake. I own it, and I'm really sorry for that.
You said a moment ago that if you hadn't tested positive for COVID-19 on December the 16th, because of the decision you've made about vaccinations, you would have been prepared to miss the Australian Open, which is something a lot of people are surprised to hear. Do you remember when you were first made aware that a recent COVID infection, which creates antibodies, would gain you a medical exemption from Australia?
I am not exactly sure of the date. I remember it was probably the second week of December that we received that circular email where it came to our attention that if you had a previous or recent COVID infection, that you'll be eligible to apply for medical exemption. That's what we have done.
Because I looked online just this morning before coming here to your tennis centre at some of the coverage of this whole saga. And one of the main arguments of your critics is that it's awfully convenient that you got this COVID infection in mid-December because that's the only way you got to play at the Australian Open. What would you say to those critics?
I would say that I take COVID very, very seriously, as really anybody else. And I assure you that I was taking PCR tests as anybody else. I never used my privileged status in this country or any other country. And I was tested hundreds and hundreds of times since the beginning of pandemic because that was required in order to travel and in order to do my job as a tennis player. So I understand that people come out with different theories on how lucky I was or how convenient it is. But no one is lucky and really convenient of getting COVID. You would agree, Amal. I mean, I had COVID twice. The second time was asymptomatic. The first time was about year and a half ago, and I had symptoms, and it wasn't easy.
Do you worry that people have got the impression, looking at what happened in Australia, looking at what happened here, looking at some of the reporting around this issue, thinking about that tournament you organised, the Adria tournament, which became a super spreader event. Lots of people were pictured unmasked. There wasn't social distancing respected. People look at all this stuff and they say the thing about Novak Djokovic is he doesn't take COVID seriously. What do you say to them?
That is false conclusion. I do take COVID very seriously. And going back to the Adria tour, we respected every single protocol, rule, and policy that was put in place in Serbia at that moment. So at that moment, there was no mask required. We could host an event. So we just respected and followed whatever the government of Serbia was telling us that we have to follow. And I understand that looking from a perspective of a different country that had a very strict protocols, that it did not look good. But every country has been dealing with COVID slightly differently. And it really creates a bit of a confusion, really, for everyone.
You mentioned that your application for a medical exemption was anonymous and it was approved by 2 independent Australian panels. Separately, there was a travel declaration which you had to fill in which your agent made an error, a human error, which you've apologised for. And your agent wrongly said that you had not been anywhere other than Serbia before travelling to Australia. In fact, you had been to Spain. Again, can you see why a lot of people unaware of the detail of this saga, who maybe don't follow you on Instagram, didn't see your apology, but just aware because they read a news story that your forms have an error, again get the impression that you or your team were willing to play fast and loose with the rules?
I understand why people think that when you chronologically take all these things in consideration, feel like I have cheated or I've done something that is not right. But I always did the right thing. And I entered Spain normally. I went through immigration zone with my passport, with my family. I was going around the public places those 7 or 10 days that I was there. So yes, the visa travel declaration was not a deliberate error. It was a human error made from one of the members of my team. I have people in my team that are responsible for logistics and filling up the documents, and the person who has done that has been doing that for many years, and she ticked the wrong box. And actually, the federal court, as I mentioned earlier, and the minister for immigration have confirmed that it was not a deliberate mistake. It was a human mistake, and that has not influenced my deportation from Australia.
So let me ask you directly again. Do you know of any attempts by anyone to tamper or mess with either the test that you've done for COVID or your official application to get into Australia?
No.
None whatsoever. Have you received any vaccination against COVID?
I have not.
Why?
I understand that and support fully the freedom to choose, whether you want to get vaccinated or not. And I have not spoken about this before, and I have not disclosed my medical record and my vaccination status because I had the right to keep that private and discreet. But as I see, there's a lot of wrong conclusions and assumptions out there. I think it's important to speak up about that and justify certain things, right? So I was never against vaccination. I understand that globally, everyone is trying to put a big effort into handling this virus, and vaccination is probably the biggest effort that was made. And I fully respect that. But I've always represented and always supported the freedom to choose what you put into your body. And as an elite professional athlete, I've always carefully reviewed, assessed everything that comes in from the supplements, food, the water that I drink, or sports drinks, anything really that comes into my body as a fuel that I can benefit from. So I take that very seriously. There's a process of precise decision making. It has been like that for the last 20 years, and that allowed me to endure this much. So based on all the informations that I got, I decided not to take the vaccine as of today.
As of today?
Yes.
So you will
I keep my mind open. I'm part of a sport, a very global sport that is played every single week in a different location. So, I understand the consequences of my decision. And one of the consequences of my decision was not going to Australia, and I was prepared not to go. And I understand that not being vaccinated today, I'm unable to travel to most of the tournaments at the moment.
And that's the price you're willing to pay?
That is the price that I'm willing to pay.
What are the criteria by which you choose what goes into your body? What goes through your mind when you're deciding what does or doesn't go into your body?
As I said, it is a very precise process of understanding what comes into my body and how is that going to affect me. And as of today, I just don't have enough clarity of how the COVID vaccine will affect me and whether it's going to, create a certain effect on my game, and I wouldn't have the benefits that I would normally have. So I just don't feel at the moment this is the right thing for me to have.
See, that's so interesting because the World Health Organization position is that the vaccine is effective across all age groups. You're not saying that you doubt that it's effective against COVID-19. You're saying that you just don't know the full range of the effects it will have inside your body. And until you have more information, you're not going to have that vaccine.
That's exactly what it is.
Do you have a particular concern about this vaccine, or a general view that if you have to take a vaccine, it says something bad about your approach to your own health?
No, I don't have anything against the general approach to vaccines. I had vaccines when I was a kid.
Did you?
Yes, because it was required for me to go to school and get vaccinated. So I had various different vaccines. I just feel that currently I just don't have enough information about this vaccine. And as an elite athlete, I am very mindful of what I put into my body. And I made a decision that I don't want to get vaccinated at the moment.
Because a lot of people around the world would see the experience you've had. They'd see the public outcry, the headlines, the detention, the legal disputes. And they might just say, Novak, mate, just take the damn jab. It doesn't hurt. It means you can play anywhere. It keeps you safe. It keeps everyone else safe too. We all do things that we don't want to do, that we're hesitant about. What's so hard about a bit of medicine?
I respect everybody's decision to get vaccinated or do anything that they really think is correct for them. And I hope that people will respect my decision not to get vaccinated. And as I mentioned before, I have to repeat it again, I will have to accept and I take all the consequences of my decision. And I'll probably not be able to play a lot of tournaments. And at the moment, this is my personal decision, and mostly from the stance or the principle of elite professional athlete. It's really a mindful thought process of every single thing that comes into my body.
Where does this come from? I'm so fascinated because I can see that you believe extremely strongly in the sanctity and the sovereignty of the individual and the individual's right to choose. Where does that come from? Why do you think like this?
Well, perhaps it has something to do with my upbringings. During 90s, when I started playing tennis, when I was 4 or 5 years old, we had 2 wars and we had embargo, sanctions, just waiting in line for bread and milk. It was a very difficult time for my family, and I chose to play the sport that is one of the most expensive sports and very unaffordable sport for a lot of people. And my parents had to endure a lot of hardships in order to allow me to live my dream. I wasn't traveling a lot as well for the tournaments, like maybe some of my friends from the same generation around the world, because we didn't have the means. And also when I was traveling, I had to very quickly mature and be independent and take care of myself, because I could not travel with my father or with my family members or coaches. So many of the tournaments I traveled alone.
So you became self-reliant quite
young.
So
I became self-reliant from very early on. And I think that helped me to really, establish my own character from very early on, and just hold my ground, so to say, with whatever is happening. And we had, bombs flying above our head in '99 when I was 12 years old for 2.5 months. And after a week already, we started disregarding the planes and rockets and bombs flying above our heads and just played tennis the entire day. And we didn't have school, so we celebrated the tennis. I don't reflect and look back at those times with anger and frustration. I'm grateful that I've been through that experience, because it makes me more appreciative of everything that I got. And I think that has influenced a lot my character today and how I'm dealing with life in general.
What you're outlining is a classic tension in political philosophy, which is individual freedom and the right to choose versus the collective good. And often in life, they come into tension with each other. Do you accept that what might be good for you individually may be harmful to the collective welfare? If one person chooses not to get vaccinated, that might undermine the collective good.
I understand that there's that kind of stance as well, and everyone is entitled to their opinion. Everyone is entitled and have a fundamental human right to choose whatever they want to put in their body. And I just hope that people will respect what I chose.
I want to ask you, please, to speak directly to the Australian people. They're a sport-loving people. Millions of them have taken you to their hearts as their champion over many years. But as you say, they endured very difficult restrictions. They had one of the toughest regimes anywhere in the world. And then they see a visitor who they've taken in as their own, a world-famous one, try to get in without a vaccine. Can you see why so many Australians took against you?
Yes. Yes, I can, and I understand after everything that they've been through. And many Australians, as I understand, have not been able to go back to their country because of restrictions. And then you have tennis players coming into your country. So I want to tell them that I always follow the rules. And I understand that there were, politicians from the Australian government saying that the rules are rules for everyone, and that there was a false perception of me misusing, my privileged status in order to come in by force into Australia, it was never the case.
But then it moved on, didn't it, to public health? Because as you mentioned, the Immigration Minister, Alex Hawke, who cancelled your visa the second time, said that you were potentially going to inspire anti-vaxx sentiment. And the judges who unanimously upheld his decision said, and I quote, "An iconic world tennis star may influence people of all ages, young or old, but perhaps especially the young and impressionable, to emulate him. This is not fanciful," they said. it does not need evidence. What do you say to that?
Well, I completely disagree with that perception. And I'm really sad and disappointed that I was deported on those bases from Australia.
But you do inspire people, don't you? You inspire young people.
I do inspire people, but I never inspired people to go out on the streets and protest and be part of the anti-vaxx. I never inspired that.
The fact is, you have become a hero to many people in the global anti-vax movement. On the way here today, I see graffiti just a few hundred meters away, which is anti-vax with your face on it. And yet you're saying to me that you're not anti-vax. What do you say directly to anti-vaccination campaigners around the world who proudly declare Novak Djokovic is one of us?
I say that everyone has the right to choose to act or say whatever they feel is appropriate for them. And I have never said that I'm part of that movement. You know, no one in the whole process during Australian saga has asked me on my stance or my opinion on vaccination. No one. So it's really unfortunate that there has been this kind of misconception and wrong conclusion that has been made around the world based upon something that I completely disagree with.
I'm not here to sympathize with you, but I do want to understand you better. And I can imagine, listening to you, that your experience in that detention hotel was far from pleasant. Can you just talk us through what it was like?
Well, definitely it wasn't pleasant. But, you know, I don't want to be sit here and complaining about conditions in that detention center because I stayed around 7 days, and some people there have stayed for years.
There are other,
actually, some of them for 9 years.
There are other refugees that are in the same hotel. Yeah,
exactly. There's asylum seekers and refugees that stay there for 9 years. So I definitely wanted to meet with them, but I didn't have an opportunity. No one was allowed to go out from the room, and it has become a global problem. You know, when I was a UNICEF goodwill ambassador during the crisis of Syria and Middle East, refugees crisis, there was tons and tons of people going through my country, through Serbia. I remember that day when I went as part of the UNICEF initiative to visit families, particularly children with their mothers. That was incredibly emotional moment for me because I grew up also with refugees during 90s when we had, embargo and war, and there was a lot of people that lost homes, lost dear ones. And so it has deeply touched me what people in the detention center in Melbourne are going through. And so, my hardship was nothing close to what these people are going through.
It can't have been easy talking to your kids on the phone and explaining why they're not going to see daddy on the court this time. I mean, that must have been tough.
It was tough. It was very, very hard. At one point, while I was still at the airport, I couldn't use my phone for 3-4 hours. And, it was, I was lost, really. I didn't know what is happening, what I need to do, what more I need to do and provide. And I couldn't get in touch with my family. And then, I was in detention center and I had my phone with me, so at least I could have video calls with them. But at that point, I was supposed to be deported. And then, of course, I stayed there for 4 or 5 days before the first court hearing. I was hoping for a good result, and the visa was reinstated, first revoked and reinstated and revoked again. So I was free for 4 days and I was training. But it was not a regular kind of training days that I would normally have prior to the Grand Slam competition. I had helicopters flying, above every single training session that I had on Rod Laver Arena, cameras all over the place. Also my colleagues, and that really hurt me a lot, because I felt that energy and those looks from my colleagues and people that were in the tennis facility. And obviously, I understand that they had a perception that was based on what they were seeing from media reports, and I wasn't going out in media because of what I previously said, and respecting the legal process and respecting Australian Open. But at that time, I really wanted to speak to everyone and give my explanation. And so, because I greatly care about the relationships with people, because they're my colleagues, they're my peers, they're people that I see probably at times more than my family. Yeah, I mean, look, it wasn't easy, but it surely is very valuable life experience for me. And I'm sincerely hoping that I'll get a chance to play, because this is what makes me the happiest person other than being with my family, is playing tennis.
You talk about the people that you're grateful for, and I imagine there's no one that you owe more than your parents. They endured immense sacrifices. I read that your father said you lived in rented accommodation for 17 years. You mentioned the embargo, queuing for bread and water. Your dad sold the family gold. I think he once put a last dinar on the table. He borrowed money from loan sharks.
Yes.
Just tell us a bit, if you wouldn't mind, about the sacrifices your parents made for you in order that you could achieve what you've done.
Well, there's no doubt that without their sacrifice and their willingness to put their own personal interest on the line for mine, I wouldn't be able to sit here with you and speak to you as a number one tennis player in the world, without a doubt. And I'm always reminding myself of that. I'm very grateful and appreciative of their efforts. I know how hard it was, not just for them, for everyone really living in this country and this region for that matter. 90s were very hard for Serbians, Croatians, Bosnians, everyone really in the region. So it was a sad time. It was unpredictable what tomorrow brings. And me asking my dad to buy a tennis racket as a 4 or 5 year old was a big ask, because it wasn't a big ask for him to buy a tennis racket and a ball, but it was when I started requesting more and more. And
tennis is expensive.
Tennis is expensive, and my father and my mother, they never played tennis. My father was a professional skier and a football player, and he met my mom on the mountain as a ski instructor. My mom graduated on University of Sport here in Belgrade. So I come from a sport family, but no one has touched a tennis racket before. So they are definitely, the reason why I'm here today.
Let's look to the future. You say that as things stand, you don't have enough clarity about the COVID-19 vaccine in order to let it enter your body. If that changes, if you get enough new information that persuades you that it's not going to cause you harm, which you don't want, would you be prepared to change your mind?
As I mentioned before, I keep my mind open. So there is always a possibility that things will change in the future. As of today, this is my decision and my stance for it. And I will suffer the consequences of not traveling to the tournaments, but hopefully the things will be able to change in the future, and I keep my mind open, and we'll see what happens.
And longer term, are you hoping that the international regulations change and ease in order to let you travel to these tournaments?
I sincerely hope so, because I would really love to play tennis, because this is what I do. I'm a professional tennis player.
But as things stand, if this means that you miss the French Open, is that a price you'd be willing to pay?
Yes, that is the price that I'm willing to pay. At the moment, of course, I hope that things will change, but I'm also hoping that I can play for many more years. So taking care of my body has always been the highest priority, and because I know that that's going to give me longevity. And I'm certain that if there's still that flair and passion and love for the game in me, and if I take care of my body, I'll be able to have many more opportunities to play the tournaments that I miss.
And if it means that you miss Wimbledon this year, again, that's a price you're willing to pay?
Yes.
Ultimately, are you prepared to forego the chance to be the greatest player that ever picked up a racket, statistically, because you feel so strongly about this jab?
Yes. I do.
Why, Novak? Why?
Because the principles of decision-making on my body are more important than any title or anything else. I'm trying to be in tune with my body as much as I possibly can. I've always been a great student of wellness, well-being, health, nutrition. I changed my diet back in 2010. Changing the diet has affected my mild asthma that I had and issues with breathing. And since I was 7, I had clogged up sinuses. I had surgery of my sinuses and nothing was helping. And then I changed my diet and that helped. And so ever since then, I've been very cautious about what I eat, how much I sleep, the air that I breathe, the amount of time I spend in the nature, the environment that I have, the people, the relationships, because ultimately everything has an effect on you as a human being because you are whole.
Given you're usually in Grand Slam finals, it must have been a strange experience for you watching Rafa Nadal against Medvedev in the Australian Open final. What was it like to watch the final? Presumably you saw it on TV.
It brings a smile to my face because I have the image of my wife and my son cheering for the different players on the court that day. My son is a big Rafa Nadal fan. My wife was cheering for Medvedev, my son was cheering for Nadal, and every point that Rafa would make, Stefan would be jumping around and fist pumping like Rafa.
But if you were playing against Nadal, he would support you over Nadal, right?
Yes, I mean I hope so.
Yes, that'd be awkward at home if.
But he asked me a few days ago when I was putting him to sleep. When is the next tournament where you're going to participate and play, where Rafa is going to be also? And I said, well, I'm not sure. I hope very soon. And I said, why are you asking me that? He said, because I would really love to make a photo with Rafa. I said, we'll arrange that, I'm sure.
I'm sure you can get that done. Look, you're 34. You have a lot of tennis and life ahead of you. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I would like people to remember me as someone that really shared his passion and love for the game on the court. And he has always been true to himself, very authentic, and expressed his emotions, you know. And of course, I'm not proud when I break the record on the court. This is not what I like to do. I know there's a lot of young people around the world that watch me play. And we talked about the role model and an example. And I'm aware of that, very much so.
Do you feel you let people down when you lose your temper?
When I lose my temper, I feel I let myself down. And I'm working on it, you know. Of course, I do not, intend to go out on the court and lose my temper. But I'm not afraid to say that I was wrong and I did a mistake and ask for forgiveness and move on. So I would like people also to remember me as someone that used the tennis as a platform, as a vehicle to share the positive message around the world about education, about passion, about health, well-being. That's something that is very important to me. I've been blessed with amazing results that I've made throughout my career. I hope that I can still continue to make records, break records in the future. It's not the most essential thing of reason why I still play tennis. I play tennis because I still feel connection with the inner child, the 4-year-old boy that took a racket and said, I love this sport. I want to play it all day. I still do it in my center today, being in a role of a player and a coach and a mentor at the same time. I spend most of my time being in Serbia here in this tennis center. I'm coaching kids of different ages on the court. So, in the end of the day, all the success that I have made and accomplished and I've been blessed with is worth nothing if I'm not sharing that, if I'm not conveying that to a younger generation.
Novak Djokovic, thanks for speaking to the BBC.
Thank you.